group project and when people are giving us kind of feedback. Our hope from tonight is to basically choose what our topic is on the mural. We might not be successful if we've got too many ideas, but if some natural ones emerge, those are the ones that we'll kind of run with for our next meeting. So to kind of talk a little bit about what our purpose is. This is kind of a major piece of public art for Chelsea. David's going to be producing these murals on aluminum panels so that even if that building should come down or they need to do renovations, that we can take those panels off and save them for posterity. We're really kind of showing a demonstration of the investment that we're making into the downtown and into Chelsea. So the same way that a lot of property owners are investing in their properties, the businesses are investing, the city's been investing in terms of care for our vulnerable residents. We've been looking at events. This is really sort of a tangible record of kind of the culture of our neighborhood. It'll sort of be this sort of memory of our particular moment in time. And also just for, while we might do things like the night market, or there might be something happening inside the businesses, that there's not always a way in which that gets communicated. So it's going to be kind of a key message for people to kind of understand what's happening here. And part of what the mural is going to be doing is kind of telling a story. So the same way, when you meet somebody new, that they might say, like, what's your story? People oftentimes talk about, like, the stories we tell ourselves become sort of how we live our lives. That in some ways this mural is going to be doing the same thing for our community. The idea is that this mural is sort of speaking for our collective voice. So I'm hoping that you'll all kind of represent both your particular point of view, but also thinking about some of the other voices in our community that need to be expressed. And by just kind of the particular messages that get lifted up, that there's going to be a power in that expression of the story that we're telling, that'll become kind of this shared language, the same way just even with the mural that Sylvia did in the Chelsea Walk, or some of the events, it kind of becomes part of our collective story about these things that come forward. We're sort of going to try to hold the balance of recognizing that this mural is important, and we want to sort of really take our responsibility seriously, but also recognizing this isn't the be all and end all, that this is just one of the stories of Chelsea, that we don't have to tell every story in this one particular piece, that it's just the start of a conversation. So that recognize that it's not going to be the only thing, it's just the start of what we're hoping to do here. And to think that the mural, to be effective, it's really going to have a particular point of view, and that to be appropriate for us to kind of have the same way when you tell a story, you don't want to go down too many tangents. You want to actually sort of be able to make a full expression and tell that tale. I recognize certain things aren't going to be able to be included, but that we want to sort of tell a rich and complex one in what we're doing. So hopefully that's not too many kind of rich things, but hopefully to kind of give us a sense of our context. So it's both incredibly important and try not to sweat it. The idea is we're going to try to make it as rich as we can. So I'm going to actually go through each of your particular faces along the way and invite people to introduce themselves. So if you could say what your name is, if you have specific affiliations that you're coming with, recognizing that really affiliations, we're not necessarily speaking for our particular organizations, you're kind of still individual people. So we kind of put a little asterisks of like affiliations for identification purposes only. And if you could maybe describe if there's a particular piece of public art that has been particularly resonant or memorable to you, that has kind of meant something to you. So I will start. I'm Mimi Graney. I work here in City Hall, and I'm helping to facilitate public art and different public programming here in the city of Chelsea. And one of the pieces of public art that's been resonant for me is the Holocaust Memorial that's down near Faneuil Hall, that are these sort of glass towers that are kind of there amidst the bustle of kind of a tourist area. It had been a market. And it's particularly resonant for me because it sort of invites you to kind of enter in and through, kind of have a separate experience outside of the rest of the bustle. And when I have walked down through each of those individual towers, it really kind of gives me a moment of reflection and they have all the individual numbers that are representing the many lives that were lost. There's steam that's sort of rising that evokes sort of the crematoriums, and it provided a moment of kind of storytelling, but also creating this experience that I entered into while I was doing it. So I'm going to kind of go around the folks that are kind of not part of the organizers first, and then we'll kind of go around. So Lisa Santagate, if you can introduce yourself.
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Santagate. I was born in Chelsea, raised here. I live downtown as well, across from City Hall. I'm an educator in the city. I also left the area for 15 years and lived in Zambia in South Central Africa. I have seen, fortunately, in my life, a lot of public art around the world. I think one piece that I love, which was one of the first pieces I saw, was the big, on the mall in Washington, D.C., the big hand. I think it's called The Awakening, the body that's kind of coming out. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. It's beautiful. And I loved seeing that. And I've seen some heavy stuff as well. In Cambodia, there are some public art memorials to the genocide. So, yeah, and the Resting Buddha in Bangkok as well.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
I like big.
Matt, can you introduce yourself?
Matt Frank, I'm a former city councilor, currently affiliated with, I do photography on the side, so I'm Matt Frank Photography, and I do work for the Chelsea Housing Authority currently as well. I'm lifelong Chelsea. I've been here my entire life. I'm fourth generation on my mother's side. So, you know, there's a lot of, I know a lot of the like different veins of Chelsea history. I'm sure if you put me and Lisa in a room together, we could go on forever. So when it comes to art, one thing that really connected to me when I was younger was as you were heading from downtown towards Market Basket, underneath the overpass, and I think there's probably 2 people in this room that would remember it, maybe 3, there was a mural on the right side, and it was like this 1980s Chelsea, you know, very block font, like New York City Chelsea mural. And it kind of just stuck in my head. And I know it was there for several years. And then one day they just kind of painted over it and it was gone. So that kind of sticks in my head because I always kind of think back to that whenever I think about murals. Modern day, I'd say the murals that public art that kind of really gets me right now is downtown Lynn. If anybody's been to downtown Lynn in the past couple of years, they literally just have murals everywhere you look. But they recently just put one in that you really can't appreciate it until you're about 2 miles away or like a mile away up on the hillside, because this thing must be like 7 stories tall. It's this this kid who's a basketball player, and he's just carrying his sneakers with him. And when you're up close, it's almost too big to see. But when you're like way far away, he looks like he's like standing in front of you, but you're like a mile away. So that's my current favorite public art thing at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jackson. I'm the director for the Public Library in Chelsea. I lived in Chelsea for a while, but I've been at the I've worked at the Chelsea Public Library for 12 years. I guess probably my favorite piece of art, and I went to go grab it too because it's constantly changing, is the art in Dewey Square over by South Station, because it's just that immense canvas that gets changed all the time, and the excitement for when it changed. I mean, this one was we actually have it framed, my husband painted it. This one was my favorite. But the fact when it changes, you know, the excitement of going over there and be like, oh, they're changing it, and then seeing them working on it, and then seeing it all summer, well, in normal summers, going to South Station in different lights and during the day, and seeing people, you know, they did such a nice job with that park. There's like bunnies in that park, and just hanging out there and seeing it, you know, sunset over it. I just think that spot, which was a hideous highway overpass fan thing, what they do to it, I just love. And I know that some of them are controversial and some of them maybe we don't love as much as others, but they're all definitely unique, because that's probably my favorite around.
Great. Siboney.
I'm Siboney Sanchez. I work for the neighborhood developers, and I believe I saw Lisa on our call last time. So, hi, I hope you don't have a 7 o'clock. I moved here from, so I'm in the real estate development team at T&D, but I'm an architect by training, and I moved from Texas to the Boston area this past fall. So as you all have been naming various locations, I have a bunch of tabs open just based off of what I've been hearing from you all. My favorite public art, that's really tough. I just a little bit of background. I was raised by an arts administrator, and I have a decent amount of experience in facilitating public art initiatives, for better or worse. I'm really good. And I would like to say that Chicano Park, which is based in San Diego, actually under a bunch of freeways, and it's a kind of strange layout for a park, but it's some amazing murals in that space that have made it a real destination.
Your audio sounds a little crazy to me. Does it yeah? So yeah. Siboney, if you've got like a headphone, a mic or other thing you can plug into, maybe I found that when you kept moving that it kind of went in and out. So
if you want to move on to the next person, and I'll go to my other computer.
Okay, sounds great. Maria.
Hi everyone, Maria Belén here. I guess my affiliation is Green Roots. I was born and raised in Nicaragua, and I say that because I know David has done some art in Nicaragua. I've been living in the U.S. for about 17 years. Maybe I shouldn't say that. And have been working in Chelsea for almost 10 years. I think the art that has been the most powerful to me has been, growing up in Nicaragua in a post-revolution context. There was a lot of political art, and I would say that has been the most impactful for me, as well as pottery. My dad was a potter, and there's a lot of ceramic in Nicaragua, and so that is also a type of art that I really love and is really popular and common in, I would say, in Central America and Latin America. So yeah, I'm excited to be part of this process. Thank you, Mimi.
Ellen Rovner.
Hi. I'm Ellen Rovner, and I'm also, in many ways, 4th generation on my father's side in Chelsea. I don't live in Chelsea now, but I did as a younger person, and for the past several years, I've been involved at the Chelsea Collaborative. I'm on the board, and also working with people at Temple Emmanuel and the Walnut Street Synagogue to kind of sustain those two places of worship. And I also run something called Chelsea Jewish Tours that I've done for about the past 4 or 5 years. It's been really pretty successful. And when I think of public art, I think of an installation I saw maybe a year or so ago at the Brooklyn Museum. And it was a big sculpture in front of the museum that was in yellow. It was a big metal sculpture. And on one side, it said Y-O for yo. And on the other side, when you look at it from the other direction, it said O-Y for oi. And it just kind of captured the demographic changes and the richness of the cultures that have made that area and have made Chelsea like Brooklyn. So that was really very impressionable. Very, children could climb on it. The artist had a really nice statement about what she was trying to express, and I really liked it.
Brayton.
Hello there. My name is Brayton Ducharme. I am a resident of Chelsea for the past 2.5 years. I bought a house here with my husband, and I have really enjoyed getting involved in the community, learning a lot about the history of Chelsea, and being, kind of a part of its revitalization and changing. And my apologies, but I came in a little late, so I might have missed the question, but I'm assuming it's along the lines of what's your favorite public art?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, some of my favorite public art, like in terms of like what I've seen in cities, is I love, colorful murals that bring people to an urban center and, start a conversation. I loved Wynwood Walls in Miami. If anybody's ever been there, I thought that was just really fabulous and fun to walk through. And very memorable. But at the same time, I really love like the colonial grandeur of the Bunker Hill Monument. It's just a simple obelisk, but it's just so beautiful. And I love, American history and what that represents. So yeah, I was very excited to hear that, there was going to be a new mural in downtown Chelsea, and am looking forward to being a part of, giving my input and seeing how it turns out. So thank you.
All right, Carolina.
Hello, I'm Carolina. I was born in Colombia. I've lived in the US for 20 years now. I've lived in Chelsea for 9 years. I am a member of the Chelsea Cultural Council. And in terms of public art, something that comes to mind are the sculptures along the Seaport Boulevard in Boston. They're very light and colorful and fun.
Great, thank you. Alex Rodriguez. You're still muted, Alex.
My fault. I was talking and I didn't notice. Yeah, my name is Alex, and I'm part of Green Roots. I'm a youth organizer. I'm actually working on murals right now too, with my other co. And yeah, one of my favorite murals is like down in Broadway, where the Chelsea Walk Pub is. It's like really nice. Like that's the first like mural I've ever seen. So I feel like that's like nice to see. And yeah.
Great, thank you. The other Alex, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name properly. Alex from the Historic Preservation?
Yeah, so it's can you guys hear me? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can't hear you.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So yeah, hi, my name's Alex Balcarcel. I represent the Historic Commission. I guess I'm affiliated with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I would say probably my favorite public art would be graffiti art, to be honest with you. I'm a lifelong resident of Chelsea, and I grew up watching a lot of my friends, do graffiti. And I've always appreciated the art and visual of it. And, some of them end up becoming like, using that creativity to make something out of themselves. I don't know.
Thank you. Eduardo, or actually, let's go to Max Pro. Max, can you hear us? All right, we'll come back later. Eduardo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Eduardo Chacon, and I'm a Chelsea resident. I'm also part of the Jukebox event team, which is a small event producing team that's based out of Chelsea. Some of the stuff probably you'll be familiar with is like the Chelsea Night Market. Murals for me, I've always loved murals. I've always been impressed by the artist and really just what they're able to do. And I've been fortunate that everywhere that I've traveled, if there's murals, I go to find them, because to me, I've experienced that they always tell the story of that community or of that city. But to one that's recent to my mind is it's actually in Lynn. It's Ruben. I know the artist's name, Ruben Ubiera. He's from Miami. But the mural is a huge. It's like a gorilla. And the reason why I really it's impressive how big it is, the colors, how bright it is, but it almost looks like 3D. And every angle that you look from it, and whether you're close or you're far, you always find something new. And so that's been a mural that's really left, the images stay stuck in my head. So I'm excited though.
All right, so I'm going to invite David to introduce himself, but I realized that another piece of our introduction that I didn't acknowledge was that our mural is made possible by the Chelsea Cultural Council, and both they and I are super excited to be working with David, because his particular way of working is really to do a kind of collaborative process in terms of eliciting, kind of working with the community and eliciting our the particular images and ideas that are resonant for us. So his particular way of working is one that I feel like will really help us kind of find our voice here in the community. So David, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take it away from here.
All right, thank you, Mimi, and thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts about public art and things that you relish about it. So I'm going to do a. Is this where I'm going to do my presentation or
sure.
not?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll lead into that. But I'm going to do a short presentation that I put together of murals that I've done over the years myself or with other artists, and also with communities and kids and different things. And partly I want to just sort of get you thinking along the lines of how our theme of Chelsea heritage might be knit together from many different kind of perspectives and stories. So I often do, I kind of take the opposite approach of, I'm sorry, who's the guy, the artist, Eduardo, who did the gorilla?
Ruben Ubiera.
Yeah, Ruben. Because I have a much more denser approach where there'll be some things that are large scale, but there's a lot more stuff going on. So because I'm trying to basically include as many voices as possible in my storytelling. So it's not really one story, it's a multiplicity of stories. And I do appreciate, obviously, all other ways of taking on murals, but that happens to be the approach that I've taken over the years. And because we're kind of looking at Chelsea and probably looking at some of its history, I've sort of focused on murals that weave together various histories and stories about history as a way of knitting together a city or a community into one whole. And I will kind of go into some detail about certain ones in terms of process, but if you have questions as I'm going along, feel free to, just ask them, because I may not think to answer everything that is on people's minds. In terms of my own past, I have been painting murals for about 40 years, and it is true that I would say that my start was in Nicaragua in the early 1980s, not 1880s, I'm not that old, when I worked with a Chilean artist who lived in Nicaragua. I'd been so excited by all the murals that were there. I hadn't done murals myself, but I was very interested and turned on by them. So I did my first mural there, and other ones after that. But so I could say that that was really the seed that was planted there for me on my own personal journey to creating murals. And in the process, I've probably painted over 400 murals in the United States. Many of them involved working with other artists, communities, and kids especially. And you'll see some of those when I go through that. I love doing murals because I love storytelling. I guess is what visual storytelling. And I feel like they're most successful when people can find something in it that they can relate to, even if they can't relate to everything in the mural. So let me start. Hopefully I'll do this right. Eduardo showed me, and so let's see. All right. So Eduardo, am I on the right thing there?
Yes,
everything
perfect.
there. Okay. So this is the wall where the mural will be installed. And as Mimi sort of outlined, the way we're going to do this for various structural reasons is we're not going to paint it directly onto the brick wall. We're going to paint it onto these very lightweight metal panels that I've used for about 10 years for various projects. And those will then be attached over a wooden substructure and bolted and screwed onto the wall. And so that gives us the flexibility that if for some reason the mural does need to be removed or moved, it will not be, it won't be lost. And I must say that in, my lifetime, since I've been doing this for 40 years, I have lost some murals over the time, and it's always heartbreaking, especially when they're in fine shape and they're just, it's almost always because the buildings have been torn down or are being torn down. So the wall is that brick wall that you see right there at the lower level. I'd like to this would be my favorite mural that I've done, which I like to share right off the bat. It's called The Potluck. I painted it in 1994, I think, on the side of a market. It was a co-op at the time, food market, and now it's H Mart, which is in Central Square in Cambridge. And I call it The Potluck. This mural, unlike many murals where somebody sort of comes to me and wants to get something going with a mural, this was my idea to do one on this wall. I live very near it. I spent 30 years right around it. And so it's sort of it has a kind of very personal connection for me. That happens to be my wife and daughter too, holding the little girl with the yellow hat. So this mural, I started off thinking about food as a metaphor for people coming together. And it happens to be a neighborhood that has very different people of many different backgrounds, nationalities, races, different cultural backgrounds, which I wanted to use food as a metaphor for that. So for about 3 or 4 months, when I started to work on the design of this, I spent just going, I saw myself as an anthropologist going to different potlucks in the neighborhood. Some were in churches, some of them were in, a lot of them were in churches and synagogues and things like that. But I just got the flavor of the way people are at a potluck, how they get their share food, and how they stand and get food and then talk and chat and intermingle and all the kinds of things that go on. And I wanted to capture that. So here's a close-up. This woman in the African clothing is actually from Liberia, and she went to church in my neighborhood. And I didn't know at the time. I saw her and I was struck by her personality and her clothing and everything. But it turned out later, she told me that she had been a cook had a restaurant in Liberia, and because of a civil war there, she had to flee. And when she fled, she had lost all of her recipes and she had to start to recreate them here. And so it kind of like thought, these are the kinds of stories behind the stories that I think make murals can be very rich, because that's just one little story in this whole mural. But, and it wasn't even one that I knew at the moment. I was struck by her mostly. In the middle there is the potluck table, and on that is many different kinds of foods representing different cultures, like from platanos to beans to various kinds of breads. But the fun one was, for me, was the potato salad in the middle. I went to a Mother's Day church Mother's Day brunch that was at a nearby, where the pastor and the men had made all the food for the women, sort of a reverse of the stereotype. And he had made that particular potato salad. And so I put that in the middle. And he just actually passed away about a month ago. So that's kind of a coda to that whole story. Okay, this is one of the first murals in Lynn before the sort of mural mania has struck. This wall, this is about 10 years ago, is on the side of Lynn Arts, and they're actually building a park right there now. They're calling Frederick Douglass Park that will incorporate the mural. But I did this mural with two other artists, Yeti Frankel and Josh Weiner, and we were selected through a long drawn out process to design and paint a mural for this. And this is the actual final mural. And here's a close-up of it. So this mural, I thought, would be very useful for understanding both my processes, but also how history and the present can come together. So when we started out figuring out the design for this mural, we knew that we wanted to figure out a way that we could incorporate having kids work on the mural. But because the wall is 60 feet high, there was no way they were going to be able to get up there and work on it. So we decided to, in this middle area, this archway here, to create that with students working in all the middle and high schools in Lynn, and there's a lot of them, to make that part of it out of glass tile mosaic. And the kids we'd use their drawings, and they would actually build the mosaics in their art rooms with us, and then we installed it later on. So we actually went through many different stages in this design, but that part of it was done with kids. And then at the bottom, you see, we see that as being a view of Lynn today, seen through the eyes of youth, and experience how youth might experience their connection with Lynn. Above that is the history in the past. So as you know, Lynn, probably a lot of you know, has a really rich history. And this is just a little bit of it, but it was important, we felt, to really get into some of the details and to highlight some of the more monumental figures, some of whom people might know and some you might not know, but who are all very important in the history of Lynn. So this is the design. We started off with this design, but then we had to do this in stages because the funding would be raised for one part of it, and then we go to the next stage, and then we'd have to raise the funding for another part. And we realized that this being 60 feet up at the top, that it was going to be very difficult. So we sort of flattened out that top band and ended up putting more of a sky up above it. And so this was the next part of this design. It also represented the next stage of the painting. So this is what the mosaic design was like. So all of that in color was done as glass tile with kids. And then there's just one example of kids. What we did is we did artist residencies in each of the schools. And we would get the kids to do drawings, and then we'd put them together into a design. And then we would have them, we'd lay it out on tabletops, and then they'd build them on the tops of the table with glass tiles. So they're all holding tile nippers, which is how they cut the tiles. And there you can see a close-up of how different parts of this. So like two of these were probably done by one middle school, two of those panels. So each one of these was all figured out, and then eventually it was all laid out and cemented onto the wall itself. There's another, so you can kind of see where the glass tile ends and the painted areas begin. The way we saw this is we have sort of this arc of people that we, in different parts of the history that we thought would be good touchstones for understanding the history, and their names are written on it. So Frederick Douglass is the one here. He had lived in Lynn for a while. But then there's other ones, Maria Mitchell, who is not as well known, but was probably one of the first female astronomers, discovered this comet going over here. Lydia Pinkham was a 19th century entrepreneur when it was not normal for women to have these businesses. She sold a very interesting compound tonic, I guess you would call it, which had a lot of alcohol in it, apparently. There's Mary Baker Eddy, who's the founder of the Christian Science. And these guys were Huntington family singers. They were abolitionists who traveled the country in the pre-Civil War era singing songs to kind of get people on board for abolition of slavery. And there's a close-up of them. This guy was known as one of the Lynn artists who painted the seashore. And at the very end, our last stage, after everything was done except for the very top, we had to go raise the funds for that. And somehow, miraculously, the state of Massachusetts has a special grant, and nobody even knows, we never even knew where it came from because we didn't apply for it or anything, gave us the money to finish the top, which is two bits of poems about Lynn, one by Longfellow called The Bells of Lynn. And then the other one, let's see, I think I already showed it, but it's by this guy, Vincent Farini, who was a poet that grew up working in the shoe mills and later at GE, and wrote this lovely poem, a little bit of it, which is about the shoemaking industry, which is such a huge part of Lynn's story. In the middle there is more about the role of labor in Lynn, and it depicts some strikes, like this is the strike over here on the left at GE, and then there's a part, Lynn had their fire as well, which is depicted in the background. This guy, Harry Aganis, was a baseball player for the Red Sox who died pretty young, but he had grown up in Lynn and made it into the major leagues. Behind it is a venerable theater, which I think actually Chelsea might have one named the Olympias too. I might have read that, but that was one of the Lynn theaters that was so memorable. There's Lydia Pinkham, and there's Vince Farini, and that's a jet engine being done. That's my friend Josh painting on the mural, and me, and Yeti. And there's a view of it today with a market. They have a farmer's market there. And they're also making a major park there now. So I'm going to move right along. This is a mural I did in Cambridge about the history of the neighborhood where I live, which at that time when I did it was called Area 4, and now it's called the Port, which was its historical name. And here's a close-up of some of the characters. This is a woman who actually lived right down the block from me. This is Edwin Land, who invented was the Polaroid. And this is kind of using landmarks of the neighborhood. There used to be a movie theater in Central Square, and I made some of the characters that tell the story of our neighborhood larger there, like Margaret Fuller, Elias Howe, Mariah Baldwin, Clement Morgan. Those were all people who at various eras were very important in the history. Here are some local people who, from various periods in history, who I just thought were interesting and told the story. None of them are very famous. So this is a woman who started schools. He was a candy manufacturer. He owns a restaurant that's still there called Izzy's. This was a rabbi a nearby synagogue, who he's now passed away, but was there for many, many years. And this woman was a local activist, and this woman and her family, she's a mayor, was frequently been the mayor of Cambridge. Denise Simmons is her name. And here's some other characters. The Margaret Fuller House. Margaret Fuller was a 19th century feminist writer who, her home later became a neighborhood house. And these are back in the 30s, some of the kids that went there. And it still exists today, and it's very a wonderful institution. So we were highlighting it. Now, one of my first murals, other than the one I did in Nicaragua, was in Lawrence, Massachusetts, about the history of Lawrence. And it was on the Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, which is a wonderful place in downtown Lawrence that provides healthcare to the residents. And I decided I wanted to do something about the history of immigration in Lawrence, because Lawrence has always been known as the immigrant city. And at this particular time, this was in the early 80s, there were some conflicts going on between different generations of immigrants. So we had the early 20th century immigrants who came primarily from Europe, from Ireland and Italy and places like that. And then since after the 1950s, it was primarily from Latin America, from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and also from Southeast Asia, from Cambodia and Vietnam. So I decided to tell this story in two parts. One is the early phase of immigration on the right, and there's a doorway in between. And just so you know, this little girl was an Italian girl who worked in the mills, the textile mills, and at some point she was injured because her hair got caught in the machinery. But because of that, her telling her story, she'd actually testified in front of Congress, told her story after the famous 1912 Bread and Roses strike. That was the impetus for the child labor legislation and other things like the 8-hour work week, work day, and things like that. So it was a very important story. It's a rather intense image, but I thought it was an important story to tell. There's down here on the left is a confrontation between the National Guard and the strikers in the famous 1912 Bread and Roses strike that led to really lasting change for labor in that city. And then on the left side, I have the more recent immigrants telling that story. And so they're kind of like mirrors of each other, because I felt it would be an important way to draw connections and understanding between these sort of two different groups of people who had similar stories in a lot of ways. All right, this is a mural I did fairly recently on a wall. It's a series of murals. It is done on these panels, dive-on panels, about the history of Union Square in Somerville. So it starts, it's sort of in chronological, or so a Revolutionary War period. Some of you might know that Somerville, like Charlestown, and well, Somerville was part of Charlestown then, actually, played a huge role in the American Revolution. This is George Washington, who encamped there. Some of the battles back here, the raising of the first American flag, that's the way it was looked on Prospect Hill. And then this is getting more into the various waves of immigrant groups. This is a Portuguese parade, a Central American woman making pupusas, which I adore. This was like a lot of houses and places in Somerville, sometimes in Cambridge too, have vineyards in their backyards growing over their garages. And so I thought that would be a great reminder of that part of the history. There's a Italian festival behind him. Lewis Hine actually came there, the great documentary photographer who took pictures of a lot of the mill workers in Lawrence and Lowell, but all over the country, and really helped to change he came to Somerville and took pictures like these of people doing piecework. This is Union Glass, which was right across the street from where this was the largest employer in Somerville. And primarily, I would say, from what I read, it was Irish workers in the glass blowing business. But the last guy that owned this was actually, I'm spacing on his name right now, but he-
De Cordova.
De Cordova, thank you. Owned this. He's the founder of the De Cordova Museum, or at least gave the money for it. This is more recent. This is a Nepalese festival. There's a lot of immigrants from Nepal in Somerville now, so I wanted to represent them. This is but this is Union Square. So this is Union Square when it really still was a fire station there. And a little reference to the Fluff Festival, which Lynn and Somerville have to battle over who owns that. And this is the last thing, was going into the schools of Somerville, and past and present. All right. This is an early mural that I did in Los Angeles, California, on the side of a health center. I call this mural Lifeline, Building a Healthy Community. I worked with a really famous mural organization called Spark, which is based in Venice, California. And when you went down Vermont Avenue, this image of this baby being held up by these hands was, really large so you could see it. And then the rest of the mural was kind of on the side. So it was a way to kind of grab people's attention. And there's the mural and the whole of it. So it weaves together images that I thought related to healthcare and communities. So nutrition, food, doctors, obviously, but also things like housing, education, educating future scientists and doctors and things like that. And there's the last image. And it wasn't a neighborhood that had kind of a lot of different types of people came together. There was a Central American, there was a Korean, and also an African American section. And they all kind of came together right at this point where this health center was, called Practicare. That's a mural that I've lost because somebody bought the building and tore it down. So that was one of the sad stories. This is done for Trader Joe's in Cambridge. And it's just kind of a view of the river right across from where the store is, and a little bit about the history of Harvard Square. This was a result of negotiations with the ownership managers, not managers, but the president of Trader Joe's, about they really want something about Harvard Square. And since I live in Cambridge and I hate what's happened to Harvard Square, I said, well, how about we do it 100 years ago? So this whole part done in sepia is a reference to what it was like there and what it looked like in early 1900s. And actually this little girl here with the bow in her hair, that was my neighbor who lived to be 99. And so she actually would have been around there as a little girl so I put her in the mural. My friend Josh, who I already introduced you to, and I did this mural in 2008, yeah, when actually it was right around the time Obama got elected, in Wayne, Michigan, which has a huge car factory plant, Ford plant, and the Ford plant donated some money to do this mural on an old Art Deco movie theater. And so we did the whole history of the town. And in this particular case, I felt like we became therapists to the town, because they'd had a lot of traumatic things happen in the town, and their history was pretty, had some very dark things about it, especially with covenants that they had to keep out minorities such as African Americans, Jews, and Catholics. So in order to tell this story today, which, these covenants were no longer in effect, we had to figure out ways to incorporate the people of today in the past. And that took a lot of tricky negotiations. I won't go into all the stories, but I could write a book about it. So there's a picture of the mural and a close-up. this is sort of labor and owners. This was one of the owners of one of the industries there, and this guy was the head of one of the labor union that was at the Ford plant, the Auto Workers Union. This is an early one in Via Victoria in Boston, which is a neighborhood that kind of survived gentrification, to at least to some degree, because of activism in the 1960s to kind of preserve the neighborhood. And so we told this story on the outside of the cultural center at Via Victoria. And there's a close-up of it. Another history mural is in Amherst, and this mural I did about 2005, and it's about the history of Amherst. And then a couple years ago, a developer bought the building and wanted to tear it down, so we ended up, in order to preserve the mural, I and some people I hired repainted this mural last summer, and it's 150 feet long by 17 feet high, so it was quite a lot of work. But there's a few details from it. And it happens to overlook the cemetery where Emily Dickinson's buried, so there she is. It's kind of the most famous resident of Amherst. I also do a lot of murals, not just about history. I'll show you a few other things. This one's about in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's about the watersheds of Georgia. It's called Native Waters, and it's 350 feet long, and it tells the story of how the watershed changes as it goes from Atlanta down to the Gulf and the Atlantic. And there's some other, it's about 15 feet high on a retaining wall on a busy highway. This one is in a private school in Beverly. It's about the history of Beverly. It has characters who were kind of important. Believe it or not, William Howard Taft, one of the presidents, used to go there every summer for his summer vacation. So that's how he ended up in there. I'm just gonna move fast to this. This one relates to Lynn, because this guy, Jan Zeliger, was the inventor of a machine that lasted the top of the shoe to its soles and really changed the whole industry. And he didn't benefit from it very much himself, but he's holding the plans there, and he was from Lynn. And he also, because the shoe industry is big in Beverly, that's why we included him in this. All right, I'm just gonna move along. These are some other murals. This is in Westfield. Now, one of my favorite projects that I've done, other than the one I told you about, the potluck, this is on the Mystic River Mural Project, which I started in 1996 to the support of the Arts Council. That's actually where I first met Mimi. And I think, right? And every year since then, we have added onto it. I worked with a group of high school students who were hired by the city. And then it's always about the watershed, but we add on we focus on a different theme every year and add on. So this was one of the early things showing this is the Amelia Earhart Dam. It's actually, you can see the bridge, a little bit of the Tobin Bridge is up there. We do have a lot of stuff about Chelsea there. We have a depiction of the Battle of Chelsea Creek, which some of you probably know, which was the first naval battle of the American Revolution, where they waylaid the ship, the Diana. This is in Brookline, and it's a part of a series of murals that were done. I did this one, but a couple other people did murals also at the same time on various walls on Harvard Street, just down from Coolidge Corner. And mine was about the whole history of that part of Brookline. Other people did close-ups. So it's really mixed together. It's a neighborhood that's called JFK Crossing because JFK was born there, and there he is, sort of a smaller figure. But all of these people in here were, this woman had a candy store, Irving's, which was right there. This guy had the last kosher butcher shop that closed actually literally while we were doing the mural. And, you know, lots of other people in here that are mixed in. This is a wedding, Jewish wedding here. There's various people on the trolley that from different historical. This is the last series. I just want to show you how the panels get installed. So this is actually on outside of a school that I did with middle school kids in Medford. And we screw these pressure treated 1x4s or 2x4s, depending on what you want to use, into the brick using Tapcons. And then the die bond panels are screwed onto those. I like to do it so that it's not enclosed, so any moisture and water travels behind it and doesn't get trapped there. But other times we've actually enclosed the whole thing. So there's different ways of doing it, and we'll probably figure that out when we get to that. So this is a crew from the town putting it up. And there's the final thing. So Medford is obviously famous for their building clipper ships, as I think Chelsea is too. And that's the major image in the middle. I won't go into all these images because there's a lot of history there. But so that is, I'm going to stop sharing so we can get back. And if there are any questions before we do our breakout, I'm willing to ask them, or we could do that after the breakout. It's up to you, Mimi. You can direct this.
So I think we're going to try to, I want to apologize. The meeting invitation said 6:45, but I meant 7:45. So I hope folks can stay a little later. If folks can attend, I apologize for that. We're wanting to break into smaller groups since we don't have like the full crowd here. We're going to break into 3 groups, and basically your task in your groups is going to be basically answer the question, if this wall could talk, meaning that wall on 5th Street, what story does it want to tell? We're leaving that wide open. You've seen a bunch of the different walls that David's been involved in, and it's been kind of rich stories, so you don't necessarily have to be confined, but you could tell that some of them had a specific point of view, whether it was about the history of labor, or it was about the youth view of Lynn, or it was specifically about history, or it was about a potluck. I think some of the ones, the one in Somerville that was along the Mystic River was all about the story of the watershed. So thinking about that wall on 5th Street, what story do you think that wall would tell? So we're going to break into 3 groups, and we're going to come back in about 15 minutes and kind of report back for what your conversation was. So Eduardo's going to move us into separate groups. You don't have to do anything. You'll just automatically pop into your new thing, and he'll automatically whip you back into our group after about 15 minutes or so. So that since we've got kind of a smaller cohort here, David is going to be in one group and kind of playing facilitator. Maria and I are going to be in another one, and Siboney is going to be kind of facilitator in her group. So I'll leave it over to you, Eduardo, to move us into our different spaces. Is that everybody back, Eduardo?
No, for some reason, oh no, yeah, everybody, yep, this is everybody.
Everybody that's able to come back can come back. Yeah. All right, I'm going to be note taker. So if the different groups want to report back what they heard. So Maria, if you want to kick off first.
Sure. So in our group, there were a couple themes that came up. One of them is about sort of similar to some of the murals that we saw from David, having notable people from Chelsea illustrated on a mural as a way of talking about them to young people that are growing up in Chelsea and learning about the history of their community. And yeah, that being one of the themes. Another one was an idea of talking to young people in particular about what they would like to see. There seems to be a lot of movement around young people making demands around Black Lives Matter, and so trying to get their sense of what would they like to see on a mural. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about the pandemic and just really COVID-19 will be talked about for a really long time. Chelsea had the highest rates in Massachusetts by a lot. And we talked about the communities, all across the country that were hit first, worst, and that will have the hardest time bouncing back are those communities that are the most vulnerable. Low-income communities, communities of color, and communities who don't speak English as a primary language. And we talked about some of the stories from the pandemic response team and some of the things that I think will be ingrained in our memories, the daily calls and the bucket brigades, and the amount of diapers that were collected to respond to the need, and the lines of people waiting in line for food, and just how people came together to respond to the pandemic. I think it was one of the themes of how this could be an opportunity to record that, and to really highlight the resiliency of a community, and how and in the end, we sort of also talked about how Chelsea has been a place, sort of a melting pot, but also a starting point when people make it, and when they're able when they're able to have more resources or move because they've been able to make it, in their journey, either in the US as an immigrant or just as a person who came to Chelsea to live here. So those were some of the themes. Did I miss anything to the folks in my team?
No, you were very complete. Thank you, Marie.
Oh, thank you.
Siboney, what was in your group? What was the conversation?
It started out with, you all can hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
Great. Started out with Lisa talking about kind of action. There was a lot of discussion about movement and doors opening, gateways. What does it mean to actually be a space that welcomes people, and what can that movement or space look like as it relates to providing a path and providing space. And I welcome anyone from my group to jump in at any point, but I'll keep going. There was an acknowledgement of industrial history, produce market, the Chelsea Creek. There were discussions about what does revitalization look like. Sarah spoke to, how are we speaking to youth, and in the images, how are we relating back to generations so that they want to stay and feel that they are a part of this space and they are being represented. And there were references to the installation City Hall of famous people from Chelsea, but I will say that I kind of tried to navigate the conversation a little bit into who are new people that have not been documented as part of Chelsea's history. There are plenty of people who have been documented many, many, many times. And so how can this mural be an opportunity to speak to that? There was discussion about history, but it was, and again, this is where I put my own lens, Indigenous and colonial. But that seemed to be less of the focus. Who are the people from Chelsea, teens, youth? I mean, those were a lot of the pieces, but what is the change over time? And I want to go back to Lisa's point. Another verb was flowing, coming through, and then also recognizing landmarks. And I want to say Brayton talked about perseverance, right? What are the components of the turbulent histories that have made Chelsea what it is?
Great.
Did I cover any ads from Sarah, Lisa, or Brayton? Okay.
All right, Matt, for your team, what did your team or anybody from, I'm not sure who's the official representative from your group?
So we had David in our group and he was leading the conversation. I wasn't sure if that's how we're gauging this.
Just we're sort of looking at what were some of the themes that came up out of your conversation.
So some of the themes
for David to hear it from somebody else.
Okay, so our group was Carolina, myself, and David. So we had a pretty small group. A theme that both of us kind of had was kind of Chelsea, like the different people of Chelsea over the years. I know there was a focus. Carolina had a focus on like the different types of food that those people would have historically. So if you're talking about just kind of having that almost like being anchor. Another concept that came up was kind of the evolution of Chelsea, like kind of how Chelsea evolved over the years. One of the ideas I had was kind of focusing on that perseverance between the Great Fires and the pandemic that we're currently having, the collapse of the city. But overall, it was a really big focus on the people of the city. So the people of the city I'd say half the conversation was around the overall history and the people. And then the other half of the conversation was the people and kind of pretty much their everyday life through food and like what they would bring to their dinner table. Did I get that right, you think, Carolina?
Yes, yeah. I would add, yeah, we talked about food as an element that brings people together, and it can show the different cultures that represent Chelsea. And also at the end, we talked a little bit about, as part of the progression or change in the type of people that are living in Chelsea now, asking youth leaders what they see in the future for Chelsea or hope to see.
Yeah, that's where I had cut out. I cut out for a few minutes, but due to the bad internet. So I was out on that conversation. But obviously that's very important too, getting the youth involved.
I think it might be helpful. I'll kind of throw out what are some of the big themes I'm hearing so far and kind of some of the consistencies, and maybe and then I'll sort of open it up if other folks want to sort of say what are some of the things that they're hearing. I'm hearing loud and clear that we should probably do like a specific youth session to kind of get youth voices kind of in their power to kind of what their vision of the future is. I'm hearing about resilience, perseverance, overcoming adversity. I'm also hearing a theme of cultures coming together, this sort of sense of like Chelsea being a gateway city and what that means for here, it being sort of the next step and people kind of entering into a new phase, and whether that's kind of they've landed or they've arrived and what that means. And also hearing about how to recognize specific individuals, whether that's individuals of the past, of the present, to really reflect and hold up maybe some of the faces that haven't already been part of the story. Recognize how come, even if it's maybe some of the people that we already know, but how can we think of this mural as a way of educating about either this specific time or people who have been here, sort of thinking a little bit as the education record keeping of the mural. Are there other themes that kind of folks felt kind of raised to the top and they are kind of common of where we're at?
I think just the layers of history in Chelsea, like Matt said, and how it's evolved so profoundly in it will be 400 years in 2024. So just, all those different like layers of different people coming here and all of the different kind of stories that it's told associated with that.
I think also like what Maria said, the Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 portion of this is big, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. And so I agree that I feel like that, and especially not just with youth, with all of us, but with the youth part of it. I think that that's going to be an important story to tell on this.
I have a question, not so much about the themes, but more. That's my 3-year-old. but more about the process, like what happens, how many sessions will you have, how do you end up, I don't know, how do you end up deciding, David, like what happens?
You're muted. David, we can't hear you. You have to unmute your.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think Maria needs to let the youth speak there.
No more screaming. Shut it.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, one thing that I was struck by was how I did see some connections between all three groups who were, separated, and yet, first of all, the desire to somehow reflect the perspective of youth in it. That's something that all three groups brought up. The idea of resiliency, or some groups, we called it resiliency in our group, but some people have called it perseverance. So, the tragedies of the 1908 fire, and then the tragedies of today. But of course, we don't want to focus just on the tragedies. We want to focus on how people bounce, come back, and survive, and enrich the community after these tragedies. So that might be a nice, interesting exploration of that. I mean, this is all sort of new to me. I mean, I knew about the fire, but I don't know that much about it. I know that Chelsea was by far the hardest hit in the state, but I don't know the details like you guys do. So there's a lot of possibilities for storytelling there. And then also I liked Carolina's focus on food, because it's so celebratory and kind of uplifting, and at the same time inclusive and reflective of history and tradition and culture all in one bite, so to speak. So I like a lot of the stuff that came up, and I do see a lot of connections. I think, it's going to take some, picking things apart to find out how those might become images and stuff. But anyway, how are we going to decide? Hopefully we can all sort of decide together and find something that everybody is kind of comfortable with. I mean, what I bring to it is this feeling is how to translate things into images, but you guys will bring the underlying stories to it. And then I try to find things that images can reflect that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I'd say we're in a partnership here to some degree.
I just asked because we were part of the Chelsea Walk mural, and just wondering about the process and sort of the visioning. That's why I was asking, but you did answer. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of a couple of things, we're going to have, this group is going to meet again on August 6th, where we'll kind of flesh this out a little bit more. The final decision maker, so we'll have at least 2 more sessions. So that one, and then what we might do is ask people to actually figure out how can we capture some of these stories. So if we're going to tell the story of the Chelsea fire, to actually look at what are some of the archival images, some of the photos, some of the stories, or if we're going to tell the story of the pandemic or these famous people, we actually have to give David some visual representations that he can model that on. And then he's going to kind of start developing some sketches. The final decision making is going to rely with the Chelsea Cultural Council as our primary funder. So the idea is that he will have by the end of this year sort of a sketch that's going to go to them for them to kind of give a thumbs up or thumbs down. Also, the city manager will want to weigh in, and the property owner is also another kind of gatekeeper. But we're wanting by the time it gets to them that there's really kind of a consensus, and it really represents sort of something that everybody's going to say, like, yes, this is something we affirm. It reflects what the voice of this community as best as we can.
I just have two comments that I think are important that were a part of our discussion. One was that enough references have been made to the fire, was a comment in our group. And then the other piece was how can there be components of the imagery that references the countries that people are coming from? And so what are those narratives, what are those histories of different countries that people are bringing to Chelsea? And I forgot to mention that in the summary, just looking back at my notes.
So I'm kind of cognizant of everybody's time since I kept a lot of people an hour longer than I had originally noticed, folks. I think in terms of if folks are okay for next steps, I wonder if we want to try to get the youth meeting before we come together again on August 6th so that we can kind of have those voices participate. I'm kind of aware of sometimes the youth sometimes speak more freely and wholly if they're running the session. So I'll check in with David and see if we can do that together and maybe have some adults as either we can be witnesses or we can just kind of record the session same as we're doing here and let them kind of, we can listen in separately. So I'll check in with folks offline on how best to organize that, whether we want to try to squeeze it in or wait till after our August 6th session. Does anybody have any kind of immediate thoughts on what might be the way to go for that, or are you okay with having that conversation offline?
I'm just curious about timing because I know we don't know whether kids are going to be back in school or not, but if by chance they are, maybe it'd be better to have it before the next meeting or sooner somehow.
There's some natural groups that I think are already meeting. Like there's a group of kids connected with the Chelsea Collaborative that are working on our other mural projects. And there's some kids from the, with Green Roots that we can tie into, and some other folks that are working on, they're doing a poetry thing connected with another. So I think we could get a kind of a critical mass of at least have an online conversation. I think we could get it together for the 6th, before the 6th. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all for your insights. This was really interesting. I hope you guys found it interesting too, both seeing all of David's work and being part of this process and hearing some of the commonalities. It's going to be interesting to watch on how it starts to take shape.
Thank you.
All right, I'll send you all an email with the reminder for the login for the 6th. And if you have any additional thoughts you want to send to me, I'll write up all the notes and send it on to David. And if you, especially Symphony, if you've got some extra things to type up, if that's helpful, please send it along and we'll gather it all together.
Great.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
Thanks, David, for taking us through an oral history with visuals of your work. That was great.
Yes.
And thank you for everybody for being willing to share your thoughts and be a participant, because it will make it a much richer project, I'm sure in the end, for all of your efforts. And thanks, Eduardo, for guiding me through how to do this Zoomy thing.
Yeah, thank you for making us all look good on the technology, Eduardo.
Oh, no. Thank you. It's awesome. I'm excited to see how this develops. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.